recording. Sorry, I forgot to start at the beginning, but we're pretty close to the beginning. We're just doing some text stuff. I just basically have gone through these first couple of slides, reviewing strings and setting up text in P5. We'll just continue from here. So yeah, so it's a little bit easier if I have a variable, so I don't have to have the whole text here. Even if it's kind of short, I might put my other values here. So I could have string 1 be equal to MMP 210, and variable string 2 equals my hello world in Chinese. And so now I can just put these strings here. This is string 2, and here is string 1. Okay. So we can do different things with our text. Let's go to the next thing. So strings have things called methods and properties. These are kind of like variables and functions. They're almost exactly the same thing, actually. A method is a function. Whoops. Okay, sorry. A method is a function that's associated with a piece of data, like a string, and a property is just a variable that's associated with a piece of data, like a string. So a couple examples here. I'll just use a console for this one. So if we have a variable hello world, that's a string. We have things like string.length. Okay, so in JavaScript, we haven't really done a ton of this, but in JavaScript, most things, if they're variables or functions, if you put a little dot after them, they'll have some things that are attached to them. And so you can see there's a bunch of different things here, and some of them are just more information. Like the length is just the number of characters in the string. So it's 11 because it includes the space. So hello is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, space is 6, and then world is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the s.length is really just telling me how many characters are in this string. And that can be useful for, doing a layout or something like that if I need to know how much space I need for my text. I can also reference the specific parts of the string. If I say s.char at, this is short for character at. And if I put a number in there, it'll tell me the character at that number. So if I say char at 0, I get the capital H. In programming, we start counting at 0 instead of 1. And we'll look at other examples of that later in the semester. So char at 1 is E, it's the second character. And then if I do like char at 100, it's nothing because it doesn't go that far. There's a shorthand way to do this, which is just my square brackets. So if I say s at 0, that's going to give me H. There's a few other things I can do, like s.substring. And if I say s.substring, this will give me part of the string. So if I want to go from like 0 to 2, that's just going to be HE, just the first 2 characters. If I go from 0 to 10, that's almost the whole thing. It's just missing 1 character. So there's a lot of different little functions and properties associated with a string. I can also manipulate the string, like I can say s.replace, and I can replace hello with goodbye, another string, and that'll give me this result, goodbye. But it doesn't actually change my string, it just gives me the result of this. So if I wanted to change it, I would have to set it back to itself. I'd have to say s.equals s. Instead of, let's say, s.replace hello with hi. And so now s is, I've actually changed the value of s to hi world. There's a lot of other stuff that you can do if you type in s and then a dot in the console. You'll see all of this other stuff that you can do, but we're not going to go over everything today. So let's keep going. We can also add strings together. And I think we talked a little bit about this earlier on in the semester, addition versus concatenation. So addition is when I add 2 numbers together and it gives me a new number value. Concatenation uses the same operator, the plus sign, but it does something different. So if I have the string hello and I add the string world to it, it just gives me a new string with the combination of the two strings. So that's called concatenation, even though we use the addition sign there. And you can see it doesn't really know that this is like we need a space here. It's literally just looking at these characters. So it doesn't know to add a space for us. If we want it to look formatted the way we would expect it to, we have to add in a space somewhere. So we could add a whole other space here. So we get hello world, or you could put a space at the beginning of one of your strings or at the end. It doesn't really care. To the computer, it's just whatever order your characters are in is the string that you get. Um, Okay, so let's draw some strings in P5. So we've already put some strings on our canvas. So let's change them around a little bit. So we can do different things with our strings. We can change the stroke and fill just like we would for a normal shape in P5. So let's stylize our MMP 210 a little bit. And this works the same way as it does with shapes, where whatever color I apply here will apply to everything below it. So if I say fill is blue, all of my text is now blue. You can see by default there is no stroke. So if I say stroke is white, there's no stroke here. So I need to say stroke weight, and let's say it's like 10. It's going to be kind of big. Okay, so now you can see it's big, and there's some like weird like edges coming off of it, and I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, but we can also change the size of the text. So let's do that now because it's going to make this stuff a lot easier to see. So let's change the text size to 100. Okay, so now our text is a lot more easy to read. Let's move our MMP 210 up a little bit, and let's move it over a little bit. Okay, so it doesn't quite fit in our canvas, but we'll fix that in a minute. For now, actually, let's just make our canvas a little bigger, and then we'll deal with the size later. So for our MMP 210, now we're drawing it 0x and 100y, and so it fits inside of our canvas. And you can see there's these little edges coming up from the stroke. If I make the stroke bigger, they'll be more pronounced. Let's actually make this color a little bit easier to see. Let's do orange. Okay, that looks a little bit easier. But if we take the stroke weight down to like maybe 5 or 6, then we don't, well, we still get those little edges a little bit actually. What if we do like 4? Okay, now they're going away. But now you can't really see the stroke. So let's leave it at 10 and we'll deal with those later. So we can do fill and stroke and then text size to change the size, just like we do with our other shapes, except normally with our shapes, we have to set the size as part of the shape function. But here we actually change the text size for the whole program before we draw the text. So you can see that this text size 100 here is applying to my second two texts. And if I wanted to change the text size afterwards, I could say text size is 50, and then those pieces of text are going to be smaller. So that's how I change the size of the text. There's some basic styling things I can do, like italic or bold. So let's say I wanted to make my first piece of text italic. I could say text style, and then italic is all caps. I don't know if we've seen any other. Oh yeah, we've seen like center and stuff like that. Some of the all caps, um, some variables in P5 are all caps, which means that they don't change. They represent a constant value, so the value for italic doesn't change. If I want to set the text style back to regular, I think it's just normal. Let's see if that works. Yeah, but I can also do bold to make bold text. I don't know if there's any others. Let's go to the reference and look up text style. Normal, italic, bold, and bold italic. Okay, so you can combine bold and italic. So yeah, those are a few different things that you can do to fix the text size. Um, then here's the fix for those edges that I talked about. This one looks a little weird because we haven't really talked about what these things mean, because P5 kind of makes it so we don't really have to deal with this stuff a lot. But the way that we change this is by setting the miter limit. That's what determines how the stroke is wrapped around certain things. And we have to set that to the canvas. And one of the only ways to do that is to get access to the canvas. But we can do that by setting create canvas back to something. So I'll show you guys what this means real quick. And even if this doesn't quite make sense, you can just copy this code if you want to get rid of those little edges. So actually, I'm going to make the stroke weight even higher so we can see those more. And let's move this guy down just a little bit. So what I'm talking about is these edges, and if you look closely, you can kind of see basically as the stroke is trying to figure out how to turn around this corner of the M, it's making some choices that don't fully look like what it should be doing because it doesn't know exactly where we want it to go. So some of these things are just like sticking out essentially. And that is related to the miter limit, or how much it kind of folds the stroke together. So the way that I fix that, first I get a reference to the canvas. And one thing that we haven't looked at is that the create canvas function actually returns a reference to the canvas. So if I actually console.log around create canvas, we'll see what that thing looks like. It's down here in the console. So it actually gives us this thing called the canvas. And there's a bunch of stuff in here. And one of them is the HTML canvas itself, the thing that gets put into our HTML. And that's where we have to set the miter limit. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this to a variable. So I'm just going to say variable canvas equals create canvas. So now it's going to take the result of this create canvas function and set it to this variable. So now we can actually do stuff with it. So I can say canvas.get, what is it called? Oh no, it's canvas.drawing context. That's everything that's related to doing drawing on the canvas. And then there's this value called miter limit. And I think the default is like 10 or something. But if I set this to 0, oh, that didn't work. What do I have it? Oh, for some reason, I have it set to 2. Oh, maybe the default is 0. Okay, if I set it to 1, okay, if I set it to 1, now you can see I get these edges here. So this is a little bit better, and it might look kind of cool. It's kind of like stylized, but it may not be exactly what you want. If I set it to 2, now I get more close to what I would expect, except it doesn't go over. So it comes kind of close, but it doesn't quite go over. And this also relates to how wide the stroke weight is. So if I put the stroke weight at like 100, now you'll see it, we're getting those edges again. So there is this relationship between the stroke weight and whatever the miter limit is that you may have to play around with to get this exactly right. But yeah, let's see if I set it to 10. Okay, now we get the edges again. So I'm not exactly sure where these thresholds are. 5, I get some edges, but not others. 3, no edges. 2. So I guess 2 is kind of a good default here. 1 gives you kind of a different sort of style, which you may like. And then 0 kind of seems to just not do anything. So let's leave it at 2 for now. But you can play around with this. And I'll copy this code into the chat real quick in case you're following along and you want to do this. But yeah, you don't really need to know all of this right now, but if you want to use it, it's here. So that was the miter limit. So let's keep going. So we can also change the font. So we can set the text font here. And you have to be a little bit careful with this one. So it kind of depends on what computer you're on. So let's change the font for these second two. So let's say text font. And the example I used is Menlo. I think that's like an Apple font. So that works on this computer, but if you're on a Windows computer, it may not work. Let's move over my MMP 210 a bit. There we go. I'm going to move it up a bit now that I don't have the miter limit issue. Okay, so Menlo works because the font is on the computer for Apple, but not every font is. So a good way to know that is to go to CSS Font Stack. There's a website that shows you all the different fonts and what computers they're on. So I'll put this in the chat. So you can see basically the different types of fonts. These are sans serif fonts, and then you can see the level of support for different platforms. So Arial is a very common font, and it's 99%, almost 100% on Windows, and almost 99% on Mac. So pretty much every computer will use this. Certain fonts, however, are not distributed that way. So for example, the one that I just used, Menlo, it doesn't even appear on this list, so it's probably not a good one to use. But here's another one, Consolas. That is on 34% of Macs and 82% of Windows. So if I use Consolas instead of Menlo, see, it didn't work, although maybe I need to capitalize the C. No, it still didn't work. So this is just a default font. So this computer doesn't have that font on it or this browser. And so you want to maybe choose, depending on what platform you're on or what you expect your user to be using. So here's another one, Andel Mono is on 94% of Macs, but only 5% of Windows. So if I use that one for this example, it works on the Mac, but it probably won't work on Windows. So it's not a good one to use for Windows. So there's some other ones in here. So let's use one that's pretty well supported on both. Let's see. Lucida Grand is 100% on Mac and 0% on Windows, so that's not a good choice. Let's see. Okay, Verdana. Verdana is 99 on Mac, 99 on Windows. That's pretty good. I'll use that one for this example. There are ways that you can like install a font in a project so you don't have to worry about whether it's on the computer or not. But I don't think we'll get to that today. But if that's something you want to do, we could go over it. So yeah, so we can change a bunch of different stuff about the font. So here's another font example. Okay, so now let's talk about layout and alignment. So with our big paragraph, we can see that the paragraph just kind of slides off the side of the page. I'm going to take out the Chinese text for a second and just leave the paragraph. And let's put the text size down a bit. So let's move this up here. Okay, so with my paragraph, we can see that it's just going all the way off the side of the page. And that's not what we wanted to do. So one way that I can fix that is add a width to the paragraph box. So this is an optional parameter. So in my text function, I have my text, which is the paragraph, 0 on the X. Maybe we want to move it over a little bit. So it's 10. And let's actually get rid of the stroke here because now that the text is smaller, it looks kind of weird. So no stroke. And our Y is 240, that's fine. But now we can add an optional value to change the X. So I'm going to start with 200. And so you can see that that restricts how far our text can go. And there's also an optional height. So if I put 100 for the height, now we're actually losing some of the text because it goes below where we said the box could go. So we can increase the width. So maybe I'll make the width like 500. Okay, so that's almost across the screen, so we get the rest of our text in there. And we could set it relative to the width, so I could just say width here. That might go a little bit over, like especially if I start at like 30, or let's go farther, let's start at 100. So now the width, even though it's set to the width of the canvas, since I'm starting at 100, the width of the canvas actually goes 100 beyond what the real canvas width is because it's just a number. This number is 600, but if I start from here, it doesn't know that what I'm trying to do is say the width of the canvas. So I'd have to actually move it back the same amount that I moved it, from here. So let's set this to a more reasonable number like 20, and then I'd have to say width minus 20, but that would only get me back to, so let's say, so I move to 20 here, and then I'm adding width, which gets me to like plus 20 over here past the width of the canvas. So if I want to center my thing, I have to go back 20, but then I have to go back another 20 to have the same margin over here that I have over here. So we can say 20 times 2. Yeah. Yeah, no, you have to use variables. It's not, you would think so, because if you're using like, Microsoft Word or Google Docs or something like that, they'll do that for you. But we're basically doing the text layout from scratch. So you would have to, yeah, use a variable. But yeah, a variable would be a good thing here. So you might have like a margin variable, and so that would be 20. And then you could do 20 and then margin times 2 uh, to get that. But yeah, you kind of have to do that on your own. And then for the height value, it's still optional. So as long as we're getting, we see the bottom of the text, that's fine. You might want to set it so that the text doesn't get cut off or something like that. But since it's not getting cut off here, like if this was a lower value, that's not even enough for a little bit of text. Yeah, it starts to cut off the text. And it doesn't cut it off in the middle. It just kind of stops drawing text after a certain point. So it's probably better to just leave the height value out if you've figured out a good width value. Okay, so that's our text box. That's how we can do a little bit of layout. So we can also align our text, and this really changes where the text shows up on the screen. So I'm going to show this example because this just kind of shows the first part of alignment is left, center, or right. So if something is left aligned, the first character in the text will be right after the X value. So this blue line represents the X value. If something's centered, it's going to actually do the math to put the text in the middle of wherever your X is. And if something is right aligned, the last character is going to go right up to the X value. So if I change the text alignment for this document, if I say text align is, well, right now the default is left. So if I say center, notice that two different things happen. So it's kind of confusing if you have a text box versus not. So MMP 210 started here because this was the X. It's like 20, something like that. And it moved this way. So it centered it here. For this one, it already has a box around it for where it can draw. And so X was here, but instead of moving this way, because it has a box, it's actually going to center within that box. So depending on whether or not you have that optional width argument, you'll see different behaviors, which is a little weird, honestly, but that's how it's set up. So if I have text align center, this one stays the same, but my MMP 210 string moves. If I wanted to make it center, I could just add width here. Okay, but then, I'd have to do some math to figure it out. I could also just move it to the center of the canvas. So I could say width over 2. So now I have it in the center of the canvas. And same thing if I right align. So if I do text align right, so the box is going to just line up nicely with the right side of the box, whereas our MMP210, now we've moved it to width over 2. So here's width over 2. And so the last character goes right up to width over 2. So that one is a little bit confusing, depending on what you're using. We'll do center for now. So whether or not you have a box will determine how the alignment is done. So that's the horizontal alignment. We can also change the vertical alignment. And so we just add a second value into our text align function. The bottom setting is the default. So the text will draw, Y will be the bottom. And so this is Y, and text draws up from there. This here is Y. It's in the middle of the text. And then for top, this is the Y, and the text draws down. So again, the default is bottom. So if I add a second argument here and I say like top, now we can see the Y value for MMP 210 is 120. So that's like right here. And so now it's drawing down from here. This one didn't change again because it's in this text box. So it was already drawing down from the top. So again, it changes the behavior a little bit. If I change this to bottom, now this actually, we can see the string, this one actually went up. So when we have the text box, it actually uses top as the default. And so when we change to bottom, now the whole text box has moved up. And MMP210 is drawing up from where this Y is. And then if we change this to, I think it's also center. Yeah. Now this behavior kind of makes sense because this is centered and this is also centered here. So the Y is like in the middle here. So we can change the alignment. It's a little tricky, but hopefully those rules will make it easy enough to use. So I'm going to take out this second center, leave it like that. That looks pretty good. And let's keep going. There's just a couple more things. So we also can play with the leading, and that's the difference between, that's the distance between the lines in a paragraph. So we can use the text leading function before we draw a paragraph. And so it shouldn't affect, so if I say text leading, and leading comes from like lead in like the original printing press or whatever, it's like a typography term. So if we set the text leading to like 0, so it doesn't affect the MMP 210 because it only has one line. But you can see it makes our paragraph down here all line up on top of each other since we're not moving down the page at all. So if we change that to like 10, excuse me. So if we change this to 10, we can see there's still some overlap. Excuse me. Sorry, I've had some meetings today, so I've been on this microphone all day. But anyway, so if I have it at 10, we're still overlapping a little because the text size is actually 20. So if we want to match that text size, and let's put this down here. So now they match, and it's kind of hard to see, but the descenders or the parts of the characters that come down and the ascenders, the parts that go up, like the T and the I, they should be like basically touching in the middle. And so, sorry. Sorry about that. So I probably want a text leading that's a little bit larger than the size of the text. And for this, I could just take 20 and multiply it by something. So like for CSS, I'll usually do a line height of like 1.4 or 1.5. So let's see if we put that in here. That looks a little bit better, maybe 1.5. Having a little bit of text in here kind of makes this more readable. That's a fun thing to play with if we want to make this interactive. So I could say something like, uh, variable L equals map mouse X from 0 to width, and let's map it from 0 to 10 for our leading, and then multiply that by our 20. So I'll just multiply 20 times L, and now we can see our text animating. I can actually do it backwards too. Let's do it like -10 to 10. So that's kind of a cool effect. If you want to animate some text, we can make it interactive or change the leading value using a variable. Not super practical though for reading. So let's just go back to 20 times 1.5. So that's our text leading. So yeah, another thing that we can do to interact with text, this is another example of what I was just showing. And in this one, I guess I'm also changing the text size with Y. So we can make our text bigger. Another thing I can do is use the properties of text, like the substring, to animate some text. So let's look at this example and then I'll implement it real quick. So basically, this just shows more text as I move my mouse across the canvas. And so I'm just mapping the position of the mouse to the length of my string. So let's do this with my hello world string. So let's bring that back up. And let's make this a little bit smaller. I'll say text size is, let's say 20. Let's make it a little bigger. Let's say 30. Okay, and let's center it as well. So I'll put it at width over 2. Okay, and so we can animate this. So the first thing I want to do is get the length of my string. So I'll say variable len, short for length, equals string2.length. And then I'm going to map my mouse x to the length of my string. So I'm going to say variable, what did I call it over here? N. Okay, so I guess the number of characters is n, equals map mouse x from 0 to width. And then I'm just going to map from 0 characters to len, the number of characters that we have. N is number of characters. And now instead of just showing string x, I'm going to show a substring. So I'm going to say variable s equals string2 dot substring. I'm going to go from 0 to the value n that we got from our map function. So I'll put this s instead of string here. And so now we get this little animation where as I move my mouse across the canvas, we get our hello world in Chinese. Let's turn down the stroke weight a bit. And it stays centered as it's being animated out. So we could, you could align it a left or do other things if you want. We could also reverse this. So I could say like from len to 0 and it would disappear. So you can kind of do different things with that, just like you would with the interactive stuff for the self-portrait we covered last week. Okay, so that's just a bunch of random stuff you can do with text, but hopefully the basics of that makes sense. I'm going to stop recording and see if you guys have any questions.